It started at 2:47 a.m., in the dead of night, under the flickering fluorescent light of a desolate gas station. You know, the type, rundown, one flickering bulb with an old Coca-Cola machine that hasn't worked since the early 90s. I was behind the counter, stuck on the graveyard shift, scrolling through my phone when I heard the ding from the front door. Now, at that hour, you don't expect much. Drunks looking for smokes, truckers grabbing coffee, or the occasional weirdo who asks if we sell batteries for cameras at a gas station. But this was different. The man who walked in wasn't drunk or sleepy. He was off, thin, with greasy black hair sticking to his forehead. His face pale like he'd been dipped in milk. His clothes were stained, but it wasn't oil or grease, it was darker, wetter. He kept his head down as he shuffled to the back of the store. I should have ignored him, kept my head down like I always do, but something about him made me freeze. My gut told me to stay on alert, and my gut has never been wrong. Then he started laughing, low at first like a wheeze, but it grew louder, echoing through the aisles of chips and candy bars. It wasn't the kind of laugh you hear from someone who's having a good time. It was guttural, raw, like something broken trying to sound human. "Hey," I called out, trying to mask my unease with authority. "You need help finding something?" No response. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it began, and the silence that followed was worse. I peeked over the counter and saw him standing at the freezer section, staring at his reflection in the glass. But it wasn't right. His reflection wasn't mimicking him. He stood motionless, but in the reflection, his head was tilting back and forth like it was trying to shake loose. My heart dropped to my stomach. "Sir?" I called out again, louder this time. He turned to face me, but his reflection didn't. I swear to God, the air in the store got heavier, like it was pressing down on my chest. He started walking toward me, slow and deliberate, dragging his feet on the tile floor. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. When he reached the counter, he didn't say a word, just stared at me with hollow eyes that felt like they were looking through me, not at me, and then he smiled. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he whispered. Before I could respond, the lights went out. Complete darkness, except for the dim red glow of the emergency exit sign. When the lights flickered back on a second later, he was gone. But the front door hadn't opened, and the only sound in the room was the buzzing of the lights overhead. I checked the cameras immediately. Nothing. No footage of him entering or leaving. But that wasn't the worst part. The last thing the cameras showed before they cut to static was me behind the counter, talking to no one. And then, in the far corner of the screen, just for a moment, the freezer door opened by itself. Whatever came in that night wasn't human. And it didn't leave. Not entirely. After that night, I started noticing changes. It wasn't immediate, but subtle, like shadows shifting when they shouldn't, or the air getting colder in certain corners of the gas station. The worst part? The freezer aisle. I'd find the doors open in the mornings, even though I locked them every night before clocking out. Packages of frozen food would be rearranged, some completely ripped open like something had clawed through them. And the smell, God, that smell. Like something had crawled inside the freezers to die and left its rot behind. The manager blamed me for being careless, of course. "You're probably just tired," she said, slapping a checklist on the counter. "Double-check your locks, maybe drink less coffee." But I wasn't tired, and I definitely wasn't imagining it. One night, a few shifts later, the power flickered again, just like before. I was in the middle of restocking the cigarette rack when the hum of the overhead lights wavered, plunging the station into semi-darkness. "Not again," I muttered, grabbing the flashlight we kept under the counter. I made my way around the aisles, shining the beam into the corners. It wasn't just the lights, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears strain for any sound, even the buzz of the broken Coke machine. Then I heard it, a faint tapping like fingernails against glass. I followed the sound, flashlight trembling in my grip. It led me, of course, to the freezer aisle. The door to one of the units was ajar, the faint blue light spilling onto the tiled floor. "Hello!" My voice wavered, barely above a whisper. The tapping stopped. I stepped closer, the beam of the flashlight shaking as I pointed it inside. Rows of frosted shelves lined with ice cream cartons and frozen dinners. Nothing unusual until I saw it. The reflection in the glass. It wasn't mine. It was his. Same greasy hair, same pale skin, same hollow eyes staring back at me, though I was standing several feet away. The reflection's mouth twisted into that same smile I'd seen before, and then it moved. It raised a hand and tapped the glass from the inside. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, but when I blinked, the reflection was gone. The freezer door swung open wider, a blast of freezing air rushing past me like it was alive. That's when I heard the laugh again, faint and guttural, echoing from the back storage room. I don't know what possessed me to go back there. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity. Either way, I pushed through the double doors into the storage area, the flashlight barely illuminating the cluttered shelves. "Who's there?" I called out. The laugh stopped, replaced by a low whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure darted between the shelves, too fast to make out clearly, but unmistakably human-shaped. "Stay back!" I shouted, brandishing the flashlight like a weapon. The shelves began to rattle, boxes falling to the floor. The air grew colder, frost forming on the metal surfaces around me. Then, out of the darkness, a hand shot out and grabbed my arm. It was icy, skeletal, the grip impossibly strong. I screamed, pulling back with all my strength, and the hand released me. When I swung the flashlight toward where the figure had been, there was nothing. Just the empty aisle, the frost already melting into puddles on the floor. But the whisper came again, louder this time. "You're not alone." I bolted back to the front of the store, locking the storage room doors behind me. The rest of the night passed in a haze of adrenaline and dread, every creak of the building making me jump. By the time the sun came up and my shift ended, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. But as I stepped outside, I noticed something. The reflection in the glass door of the gas station. It wasn't just mine. He was there, standing behind me, smiling. I didn't look back. I didn't go back to the gas station for a few days after that. I called in sick, said I'd caught some stomach bug, and spent those nights locked in my apartment, every light on, a kitchen knife tucked under my pillow. But the thing about jobs like mine is, no one's lining up to take your place. After 3 days, the manager called me and gave me the ultimatum. Either show up for my shift or don't bother coming back at all. So there I was, back behind the counter, pretending to read a magazine but really keeping one eye on the freezer aisle and the other on the clock. Midnight crawled by, then 1, then 2. The hours felt like years, but nothing happened. No flickering lights, no eerie whispers. I started to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the lack of sleep and boredom had gotten to me. Maybe I just needed to grow up and stop watching scary movies before work. And then, around 3:15, a truck pulled into the lot. It was old, beat up, the kind you'd see in movies about backwoods towns. The headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the glass doors for a moment before shutting off. The driver stepped out, and immediately, something was wrong. He or it was tall, unnaturally so. His shoulders were broad, his posture rigid. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and his clothes were too clean, too new. It was like someone had dressed up a mannequin in fresh work clothes and sent it in. I couldn't see his face, not really, but I could feel his eyes on me as he walked through the doors. "Evenin'," he drawled, voice gravelly but hollow, like he wasn't used to speaking. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Evening. Need anything?" He didn't answer, just stood there staring. Then he turned and walked slowly to the freezer aisle. My stomach twisted into knots. I tried to focus on the magazine in front of me, but my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. The man stopped in front of the freezer where I'd seen the reflection. He opened the door, reached in, and pulled out a single pint of ice cream. Then he turned, still clutching the pint, and walked to the counter. "That all?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked halfway through. He didn't respond, just placed the ice cream on the counter and slid a crumpled $20 bill toward me. As I rang him up, my eyes flicked to the security monitor above the counter. The cameras showed every angle of the store except him. Where he should have been, there was nothing. Not an empty aisle, not a blur of movement, just nothing. "Here's your change," I said, my voice barely audible as I handed him the bills. He didn't take them. Instead, he leaned in close, his face still obscured by the cap. "They're coming," he whispered, the words laced with something that felt like static electricity. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked out of the store, leaving the ice cream behind. I watched him climb into the truck and drive off, the taillights disappearing into the darkness. The air in the gas station felt heavy again, like it had the night the lights first flickered. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, like breathing, coming from the freezer aisle. I grabbed the flashlight, my hand trembling, and made my way toward the sound. The freezer door was open, frost spilling out onto the floor. The ice cream he'd taken was gone, but in its place was something else. A small, folded piece of paper, damp from the cold. I picked it up with shaking hands and unfolded it. One word was scrawled on it in jagged, uneven letters. Run. The lights went out, and this time they didn't come back on. The darkness was absolute. No flickers, no emergency lights, nothing but the oppressive black pressing down on me. My flashlight barely worked, the beam weak and sputtering like it was on its last legs. Somewhere in the dark, something moved. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like a shuffling, a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs felt bolted to the ground. My breath came in shallow gasps, loud enough that whatever was out there could probably hear me. Then that laugh, low, guttural, and coming from everywhere at once. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, the beam cutting through the dark like a fragile thread. It landed on the freezer aisle, and that's when I saw them. Not just one, but several. Figures, tall and unnaturally thin, their bodies pale and glistening like wet porcelain. They stood in the open freezer doors, motionless, their faces obscured by the foggy glass. But their eyes, oh God, their eyes, pierced through the frost, glowing faintly, like embers in a dying fire. They didn't move, not at first. They just watched me, heads tilted at odd angles, as if trying to understand what I was. I backed away, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, as if it were circling me. Then one of them stepped forward, out of the freezer, into the aisle. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet on frayed strings. It raised an arm, long and bony, and pointed at me. Leave, it whispered, its voice layered, like multiple people speaking at once. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the front door, my shoes squeaking on the tile as I ran. The figures didn't chase me, but I could feel their eyes on my back, burning holes into me as I fumbled with the lock on the glass door. The key wouldn't turn. Behind me, the dragging sound was back, louder now, accompanied by that awful laugh. Come back, the layered voices called out, mockingly. Stay with us. Finally, the lock gave way. I yanked the door open and stumbled outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. But I didn't stop. I ran to my car, parked under the single, flickering light in the lot. The bulb buzzed erratically as I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. Fumbling with the keys, I glanced back at the gas station. They were at the windows now, pressed against the glass, their faces pale and distorted, their glowing eyes locked onto me. The car roared to life, and I floored it, tires screeching as I tore out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, the gas station shrank into the distance. But even as it disappeared from view, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air in the car felt colder, and the faint sound of that laugh lingered in the back of my mind. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, shoved furniture in front of them for good measure, and sat in the middle of the living room with every light on. I didn't sleep that night, but as dawn broke, I realized something chilling. The crumpled piece of paper from the freezer, it was in my pocket. I unfolded it again, and beneath the word run was something new, written in the same jagged handwriting. You can't escape. And from the hallway, where no one should have been, I heard the faint sound of tapping on the walls. The tapping in the hallway didn't stop. It wasn't frantic or hurried. It was slow, deliberate, like a metronome counting down to something. I sat frozen on my couch, the crumpled note still clutched in my hand. Who's there? I finally called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. No answer. The tapping continued, steady and unrelenting. I forced myself to stand, though my legs felt like jelly beneath me. Armed with nothing but the flashlight from the gas station, I'd grabbed it in my panic. I crept toward the hallway. As I moved, the tapping changed. It wasn't coming from one spot anymore. It shifted first to the left, then the right, then above me like it was playing some twisted game of hide and seek. When I reached the hallway, I aimed the flashlight down its length. Empty. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darting across the wall impossibly fast. I whipped the flashlight toward it, but there was nothing there. A laugh echoed through the hallway, faint but unmistakable. It was inside my house. I stumbled back, gripping the flashlight like it could somehow save me. That's when I noticed something written on the wall at the end of the hallway. In black, dripping letters, "You brought US here." The flashlight flickered, and for a moment, the hallway was plunged into darkness. When the beam steadied again, the writing was gone. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. From behind me came the faintest sound of breathing, shallow and raspy, like someone or something was standing right there. I spun around, but the flashlight's beam revealed only the empty living room. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. The laugh came again, louder this time, reverberating through the house. Then the lights went out completely. Panic surged through me as I fumbled my way back to the living room. I had to get out, had to leave, even if it meant running into the street in my pajamas. But as I reached the front door, it wouldn't budge. The lock twisted and turned under my hands, but the door refused to open. From behind me, in the pitch-black darkness, came a whisper. "You invited us in." I whipped around, but the room was still empty, or so it seemed. Suddenly, the flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor and spinning wildly. The beam illuminated the walls, the ceiling, the corners of the room, and that's when I saw them. Figures pale and tall, their glowing eyes fixed on me. They stood in every corner, their bodies distorted like reflections in funhouse mirrors. As the flashlight spun, their heads snapped toward me, one by one, their necks twisting unnaturally. I backed against the door, my chest heaving, my mind racing. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The figures didn't answer. Instead, they began to move, their limbs jerking and bending as they crept closer. I sank to the floor, pressing myself against the door, waiting for the end. But just as they reached me, the flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the room, and with it came silence. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, too terrified to move, to breathe. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the windows, I opened my eyes. The figures were gone. The note was gone. Everything looked normal, as if nothing had happened. But the faint tapping sound? It never left. It follows me everywhere now, no matter where I go. And at night, when the lights are off and the house is quiet, I hear the whisper again. "You can't escape us." Days passed, but the terror clung to me like a second skin. The tapping never stopped. It followed me to work, to the grocery store, even to my car. Sometimes it was faint, like raindrops on glass. Other times it was loud enough to drown out my thoughts. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it wasn't real. But late at night, when the world was silent, the whispers would return. They were getting bolder. "You shouldn't have looked," they said one night, the words slithering into my ears like ice water. "Now you see us everywhere." It wasn't just the voices. Shadows that didn't belong began appearing in my peripheral vision. Dark, lanky figures that darted out of sight the moment I turned my head. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My friends stopped calling. I was unraveling, and I knew it. One evening, desperate for answers, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I went back to the gas station. It looked exactly the same as it had the night everything started. The same flickering bulb, the same cracked asphalt in the parking lot. But as I stepped inside, I noticed something different. The air felt charged like the static before a storm. And it was empty. No cashier. No hum of refrigerators. Just rows of aisles and an eerie silence. I almost turned around and left, but something compelled me to stay. It was like an invisible hand was guiding me toward the freezer aisle. The freezer door was open, frost spilling onto the floor, and on the fogged-up glass, words were scrawled in long, jagged letters. "Come closer." I should have run. I should have screamed, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward, heart pounding, my breath fogging up the cold air. Inside the freezer, there was something new. A stack of VHS tapes, each one labeled with a date. The first tape was marked with the date of my first shift at the gas station. With trembling hands, I picked it up and carried it to the counter, where an ancient TV and VCR sat collecting dust. The tape slid in with a mechanical click, and the screen lit up with grainy black and white footage. It showed me, standing behind the counter, scrolling through my phone. Nothing unusual. But then the screen flickered, and the timestamp jumped forward. The lights were flickering, just like they had that first night, and the door dinged as the pale man walked in. I watched as he shuffled to the freezer, his reflection once again moving out of sync. But then the tape showed something I hadn't seen before. As I was busy watching him, another figure emerged from the shadows behind me. It was tall and pale, its face distorted, its glowing eyes fixed on the back of my head. It leaned in close, so close I could almost feel its breath on my neck. And then it whispered something, though the audio was too faint to hear. The tape ended abruptly, the screen going black. I ejected the tape and grabbed another, this one marked with last night's date. I didn't want to watch it, but I couldn't stop myself. The footage showed my apartment, even though I didn't have cameras. It was from the perspective of the hallway, staring into my bedroom where I lay sleeping. And standing over my bed were them, the tall, distorted figures, their glowing eyes locked on my sleeping form. One of them reached out, its bony fingers brushing my cheek. Then the screen cut to black, and a new message appeared, written in stark white letters. You let us in. The TV shut off with a loud pop, and the lights in the gas station flickered violently. I turned to run, but the freezer aisle was no longer empty. They were there, dozens of them, their heads tilted, their glowing eyes burning into me. You can't leave, they said in unison, their voices a chorus of whispers. You're one of us now. I stumbled backward, tripping over a display rack. When I looked up, they were gone, but the whispers remained. And as I drove home that night, the tapping sound came from inside my car. On the rearview mirror, fogging up the glass, was another message. Welcome home. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. The thought of stepping back into that apartment, knowing they'd been there, standing over my bed, touching my face, it was too much. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, the tapping sound growing louder and more erratic, as if the very air inside the car was alive. Eventually, I found myself at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The kind of place with flickering neon signs and rooms that smelled like mildew and regret. It didn't matter. I just needed somewhere to think. The clerk barely looked at me as I checked in, handing me a key attached to a heavy brass tag. Room 217. I locked the door behind me and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. The room was small and stale, with peeling wallpaper and a single dim lamp. But it was quiet, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the crumpled piece of paper I'd brought from the gas station. The one with the word "run" scrawled on it. I should have thrown it away, but I couldn't. Something about it felt important. Then, as I sat there in the silence, the lamp began to flicker. No, I whispered, clutching the paper tighter. Not here. Not now. The tapping started again, faint at first, coming from the walls. It grew louder, more insistent, like fingers drumming against the thin plaster. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth on the bed. Leave me alone. The lamp went out. In the pitch darkness, the tapping turned into banging, heavy and deliberate, as if something was trying to break through the walls. Then came the whispers. You can't hide from us, they hissed. You brought us with you. I scrambled for my flashlight, the one constant in this nightmare, and flicked it on. The beam swept across the room, illuminating the cracked walls and faded carpet. And them, they were everywhere. Pale, twisted figures, their glowing eyes staring at me from the corners of the room, from the ceiling, even from the mirror on the wall. You let us in, they said, their voices a chorus of overlapping whispers. You belong to us now. I backed into the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled for the lock, twisting it into place. But the whispers were inside the bathroom, too. The mirror over the sink began to fog, words scrawling across it in jagged, dripping letters. We see you. I turned the flashlight toward the mirror, and for a split second, I saw my own reflection. But it wasn't me. It was them, staring back with those glowing eyes and twisted smiles. The banging grew louder, shaking the door, the walls, the very air around me. I screamed, sinking to the floor, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. And then, as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Silence. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. When I finally opened the bathroom door, the motel room was empty. The lamp was back on, the walls unmarked. But on the bed, where I'd been sitting, was a new piece of paper. It was blank, except for a single word written in bold, black letters. Soon. And as I stood there, staring at the paper, I heard the faintest sound of tapping this time, coming from inside me. The tapping inside me was subtle at first, like a faint drumbeat beneath my skin. I clutched my chest, half expecting to feel something crawling there, burrowing deeper. But there was nothing, just the maddening rhythm that wouldn't stop. I drove back to the gas station. I didn't want to, I needed to. Whatever this was, whatever they were, it all started there, and I had to find a way to end it. The parking lot was empty when I arrived, the flickering light casting shadows that seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. The front door was locked, but as I pressed my hand against the glass, it swung open on its own. I stepped inside, the familiar hum of the refrigerators oddly absent. Felt dead. The aisles were empty, the shelves barren. The air was heavy, oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath. The freezer aisle was dark, the doors covered in a thick layer of frost. At the far end, where the last door had always stood ajar, a faint glow pulsed. I didn't want to go closer, but the tapping inside me grew more insistent, like it was drawing me forward. As I approached the freezer, the glow intensified. The door swung open slowly, revealing something that stopped me cold. It wasn't food or frost this time. It was a tunnel, a narrow, pulsating tunnel that seemed to stretch infinitely into darkness. The walls were slick and alive, veins of light pulsing in time with the tapping inside me. The whispers returned, louder now, filling my head with overlapping voices. Come to us. Join us. You can't run anymore. I felt myself step forward, my body moving against my will. The tunnel seemed to draw me in, its pull irresistible. No! I screamed, digging my heels into the floor. The tapping inside me turned into pounding, like my heart was about to explode. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me. And then I heard it, a voice. Not theirs, but mine, my own voice, calling from the other end of the tunnel. Help me. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. It was me, but it wasn't. The voice was strained, desperate, like someone drowning in darkness. Help me! It screamed again, louder this time. I shook my head, backing away from the freezer. No, you're not real. This isn't real. But the tunnel seemed to grow, the glow spreading, consuming the walls, the ceiling, everything. The figures appeared again, emerging from the edges of the light. Dozens of them, their bodies writhing and shifting, their glowing eyes fixed on me. You belong to us now, they said in unison, their voices deafening. The tapping inside me became unbearable, each beat sending a jolt of pain through my chest. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, trying to drown out the whispers. Then I remembered the flashlight. My shaking hand found it in my pocket, and I turned it on, aiming the beam at the tunnel. The light seemed to cut through the darkness, the figures recoiling as if burned. The whispers turned to screams, the walls of the tunnel shaking, cracking. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, through the aisles, past the counter, out into the parking lot. The gas station erupted behind me, not in fire, but in light, blinding, searing light that swallowed everything. I stumbled to my car, barely managing to get the engine started before I sped away. In the rearview mirror, the gas station was gone. Not destroyed, asterisk gone asterisk, just an empty patch of dirt where it had once stood. But the tapping, still there, and every time I look in a mirror, I see them, watching, waiting, and I know this isn't over. Not yet. The tapping is relentless now. It doesn't just echo in my chest or my mind. It's everywhere. In the walls of my apartment, the pipes of my sink, the ticking of my clock. It syncs with my breathing, my heartbeat, until I can't tell where it ends and I begin. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls. What's the point? They're with me wherever I go. The mirrors are the worst. Every time I glance at one, there they are, just standing in the background. Their eyes glowing faintly, their distorted faces frozen in those awful smiles. I tried covering them up, smashing them, but it didn't matter. They'd appear in the black screens of my TV, the reflection in my coffee cup, the glint of the metal sink. Tonight, the whispers started again. "We're almost ready," they said, the words rattling in my head like broken glass. "It's time." I don't know what they mean, but I can feel it. Something is building, something bigger than the tapping, bigger than the whispers. I'm sitting on the floor now, flashlight in hand, every light in the apartment blazing, but it doesn't help. The shadows are alive, stretching toward me no matter where I go. The paper from the gas station lies crumpled at my feet, but it's not blank anymore. More words have appeared, jagged and black. You can't fight it. The lights flicker, and for a moment, everything is plunged into darkness. When they come back, I'm not alone. They're here, not just in the mirrors or the shadows. They're in the room with me. I can see them, pale and twisted, their glowing eyes fixed on me. They surround me, closing in, their voices a deafening chorus of whispers. "Let us in," they say. It's the only way. I raise the flashlight, but it's useless now. The beam barely cuts through the darkness, and they don't recoil. One of them steps forward, its face inches from mine. Its mouth doesn't move, but I hear its voice in my head, clear and cold. It's time to stop running. I scream, swinging the flashlight wildly, but it passes through the figure like smoke. The tapping inside me grows louder, unbearable, and I collapse to the floor. Then the glow starts. It begins in my chest, faint at first, but quickly spreading. My skin feels like it's burning, but I can't move, can't fight it. The figures watch, their glowing eyes unblinking. "You are one of us now," they say in unison. The glow consumes me, and the room dissolves into blinding white light. When I wake up, I'm standing in a place I don't recognize. The gas station is there, but it's different, brighter, cleaner, like it's been frozen in time. I step inside, and the shelves are fully stocked, the lights humming softly. Behind the counter, a new cashier stands, scrolling through their phone. I try to speak, to warn them, but no sound comes out. Then I see my reflection in the glass door. It's not me, it's them. And now I understand. The tapping wasn't inside me, it was me. And as the new cashier looks up, their eyes wide with fear, I smile. The same smile that haunted me for so long. And I whisper, "Do you believe in ghosts?" The realization hits like a thunderclap. I've become one of them. The flickering lights, the whispers, the figures in the dark. It was all leading to this. I am no longer the haunted but the haunter, bound to this place, this endless loop of dread. The new cashier stares at me, their face pale, their hands trembling as they clutch a flashlight, the same flashlight I once held. They don't run. Not yet. I remember that feeling, the disbelief, the paralysis, how it lures you in, makes you second-guess what's real. I step closer, slow and deliberate, letting the eerie rhythm of the tapping echo in the quiet. It's not just in me anymore. It reverberates through the very walls of the gas station, a heartbeat of fear. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I whisper again, my voice layered with the same static distortion I once heard. The cashier stumbles backward, knocking over a display of chips. The fluorescent lights flicker, the shadows around the aisles shifting and stretching unnaturally. I can see it now, the loop unfolding just as it had for me. They'll deny it, fight it, run from it. But it's useless. The gas station won't let them go. It didn't let me go. The tapping grows louder, the whispers filling the air. "We are here. We are waiting." I feel a pull, something deep and instinctual. It's like a script burned into my existence, compelling me to move, to act. The freezer aisle. I glide toward it, my movements no longer my own. The door swings open with a soft hiss, and there it is. The the tunnel pulsing and alive, veins of light writhing like serpents. The cashier hesitates, flashlight trembling in their grip. What is that? They stammer, their voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. I don't answer. I don't need to. The tunnel calls to them just as it called to me. They step forward, drawn by an invisible force. No! I want to shout. Don't do it. Run while you can. But the words never come. Instead, I watch as they're pulled closer, their flashlight dropping to the floor, the beam spinning wildly. The freezer doors begin to frost over, the glass cracking under the pressure of the cold. Then they're gone, swallowed by the tunnel. And just like that, the whispers stop. The gas station falls silent, the air heavy with anticipation. I turn, looking at the empty aisles, the flickering lights, the smudged glass of the door. It all feels so familiar, like the shadow of a memory I can't quite grasp. Then I see them, in the reflection of the glass, standing behind me. Not just one, but many. The others. The ones who came before me. Their glowing eyes meet mine, and for the first time, I understand what they were trying to tell me all along. This isn't just a gas station. It's a trap. A place where the lost and the broken are drawn, consumed, and remade. And now I'm part of it. The tapping starts again. Faint at first, but growing louder, stronger, as if the station itself is alive. A car pulls into the lot, its headlights cutting through the night. The door chimes. A new face enters, wide-eyed and curious. I feel the smile stretch across my face, the script playing out once more. Welcome, I say, my voice laced with static, and the loop begins again. The new visitor is young, barely more than a kid, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and earbuds dangling around his neck. He steps inside, squinting under the flickering light. His footsteps echo in the stillness, the sound bouncing off the cracked tiles and empty shelves. Hello? He calls out, his voice uncertain, as though he's already sensing something is wrong. I watch him from the shadows, the urge to step forward nearly overwhelming. It's like a script has been programmed into my very existence. Words I don't want to say, movements I don't want to make. Do you need help? I ask, my voice carrying that distorted, otherworldly tone. He turns, startled, his eyes locking onto me. For a moment, he looks relieved to see another person. But that relief fades as he takes in my pale face, my glowing eyes, my too perfect smile. I think I'm lost, he says, backing toward the door. The door won't open. It never does. His hands fumble with the handle, pulling and pushing, panic setting in. The whispers begin, faint and insidious, curling around the room like smoke. Stay with us. He freezes, his head whipping around, trying to pinpoint the source of the voices. What the hell is this? He yells, his voice cracking. I want to warn him, to tell him to fight, but it's no use. The gas station has him now, just as it had me. The tapping begins. Soft at first, like raindrops against glass. Then louder, more insistent, coming from every direction. He clutches his head, his breathing ragged. What's happening? The lights flicker violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before flaring back to life. When they do, the freezer aisle is glowing, the frost-covered doors swinging open as if inviting him in. Don't go, I try to say, but my mouth doesn't move. The whispers grow louder, overlapping, forming words that wrap around him like chains. Come closer. See what waits for you. He stumbles toward the aisle, drawn like a moth to a flame. The glow from the tunnel is brighter than ever, pulsating like a heartbeat, the veins of light writhing in anticipation. He stops in front of it, peering into its depths. What is this? The whispers answer for me. Home. He reaches out, his fingers trembling as they hover over the edge of the tunnel. No! I want to scream, but I can't. I'm trapped, forced to watch as the loop tightens around him. He steps inside. The glow consumes him, and for a moment, the gas station is silent. Then the light fades and he's gone. But something is different this time. The whispers don't stop. The tapping doesn't fade. The freezer aisle begins to frost over again, the glass cracking, splintering. And then, from deep within the tunnel, a new sound emerges. A growl, low and guttural, like the rumble of a distant storm. The glow returns, but it's not inviting this time. It's dark and twisted, the veins of light now pulsing black. The tunnel begins to expand, the walls of the freezer aisle crumbling away as the darkness spreads. The whispers turn into screams, and the tapping grows deafening, like 1,000 fists pounding against the walls. I can feel it. Something is coming. Something worse. The door to the gas station shatters, and the figures appear again, their glowing eyes wide with terror. They're not here to torment me. They're running. From the tunnel. From whatever is crawling out of it. And for the first time, I understand the truth. The gas station isn't just a trap. It's a door. And now that door is wide open. The darkness pouring from the tunnel wasn't just a presence. It was alive. It slithered and writhed, consuming the freezer aisle, the shelves, the walls, spreading like ink through water. The whispers had become screams, desperate and primal, as if the gas station itself was begging for mercy. And then it emerged. A shape began to take form, vast and incomprehensible. Its body was a writhing mass of limbs and eyes, each one moving independently, scanning, searching. Its mouth, if you could call it that, was a gaping void, rows of jagged teeth spiraling endlessly into nothingness. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs refused to move. The figures, the ones who had haunted me for so long, were no longer in control. They scattered, their glowing eyes filled with terror as they fled toward the shattered door. But it was too late. The creature reached out, its limbs impossibly long, snatching them one by one. Their screams echoed through the gas station as they were dragged back into the tunnel, into the darkness. I should have felt relief seeing them destroyed, but instead, I felt something worse. Despair. Because I knew it wasn't stopping with them. It turned its gaze on me, hundreds of eyes locking onto my frozen form. "You opened the door," it growled, its voice a cacophony of thunder and agony. "Now you must pay the price." The tapping inside me stopped. The whispers went silent. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely alone. The creature moved toward me, each step shaking the ground beneath my feet. "Wait!" I shouted, finally finding my voice. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to. Intent does not matter," it snarled. "The door is open, and your world is mine now." I stumbled back, my flashlight falling from my hand. The beam spun wildly across the room, illuminating the destruction, the chaos. And then I saw it, the stack of VHS tapes still sitting on the counter. The first tape, the one that showed me standing at the gas station counter, oblivious to the figure behind me. That was where it began. Somehow I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the tape, my hands shaking, and hurled it into the tunnel. The creature stopped, its eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" The tunnel reacted immediately, the veins of light pulsing violently as the tape disappeared into the void. The creature roared, its body convulsing, shrinking, collapsing in on itself. "No!" it bellowed, its voice shaking the very air. "You cannot undo this." But it was too late. The tunnel began to close, the darkness retreating, pulling the creature back with it. The gas station trembled, the walls cracking, the shelves collapsing. I ran for the door, dodging falling debris as the world around me crumbled. When I reached the parking lot, I turned to see the gas station one last time. The light inside was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of shadows and light. The creature's roars faded into the distance as the tunnel collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but silence. And then, with a deafening crack, the gas station imploded, vanishing into the ground. I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the empty lot where the nightmare had unfolded. It was over, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the window of my car. For a moment, it was just me. But then, in the corner of the glass, a faint glow appeared, two eyes watching. And in the distance, barely audible over the sound of the wind, came a single, familiar tap. The door might be closed, but something always finds a way back.